Your mind should be the place where you transform yourself, but you've turned it into the place where you hide. And that's the difference between living and merely existing. The forge burns, it hurts. It demands that you endure unbearable heat while the metal of your personality is shaped into something stronger. The shelter is comfortable, safe, predictable, and that's exactly why you're stuck. Henry Ford had a phrase nobody likes to hear. You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. And you know why nobody likes it? Because most people live inside their own heads, planning, dreaming, protecting themselves while real life happens out there. Your mind wasn't designed to be a hiding place. It was designed to be a transformation workshop. But at some point, you learned that running from pain was more important than becoming strong. And now, you pay the price every single day. Let's talk about something nobody tells you. There's a factory running inside your head 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never stops. It's always producing. The question isn't whether your mind is working, the question is what it's producing. And here's the brutal truth you need to accept right now. If you don't control what goes into this factory, you don't control what comes out. If you feed your mind with fear, with doubt, with excuses, that's exactly what it will manufacture for you. Thoughts of fear, behaviors of doubt, a lifetime of excuses. Ford revolutionized the world when he realized that the assembly line could transform raw materials into finished products with maximum efficiency. You have the same capacity, but you're using your mental assembly line to manufacture reasons why you can't, instead of systems that prove you can. Let me show you how this works at the deepest level of your brain. There's a neural mechanism called the dopaminergic reward system. Don't be scared by the technical name because the concept is simple. Your brain is programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. This isn't a defect, it's survival. 10,000 years ago, when a human saw a predator, the brain had to make a decision in milliseconds, fight or flight. And most of the time, flight was the right choice, because it kept you alive. The problem is, you're no longer running from lions. You're running from difficult conversations. You're running from important decisions. You're running from the discomfort necessary to grow, and your brain doesn't know the difference. To it, discomfort is discomfort, so it activates the same circuit. Flee, protect yourself, find safety, and you obey every single time. Now connect this to what the Stoics discovered 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful emperor in the world at the time, wrote something that should be engraved on your bedroom wall. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Read that again, slowly. The obstacle isn't something you need to avoid. The obstacle is the very instrument of your transformation. The forge doesn't work without heat. Metal doesn't strengthen without pressure, and you don't evolve without resistance. But what do you do when you encounter resistance? You run to the shelter, you open your phone, you watch another video, you eat something, you sleep another hour. Anything to avoid feeling the discomfort of being forged. I'll give you a concrete example of how this shows up in your life. You have an important project, something that could change your career, your financial situation, your life. But every time you sit down to work on it, your mind starts producing interference. First comes the thought, this is too difficult. Then comes the doubt, am I even capable? Next appears the comparison. Someone else already did this better. And finally arrives the perfect excuse. I'll start tomorrow when I'm more prepared. You recognize this pattern? Of course you do, because you live inside it. And you know what's happening neurologically in that moment? Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning and execution, is being hijacked by the amygdala, the fear center. It's an internal coup. Your own mind is sabotaging you in the name of protection. And you let it, because protection seems more important than progress. Henry Ford had another phrase that perfectly explains this phenomenon. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say failure is the opportunity to give up. Didn't say it's the opportunity to hide. He said it's the opportunity to start over with more intelligence. The forge implies attempts, implies mistakes, implies adjustments. The shelter doesn't need any of that because in the shelter nothing happens. You're safe, but you're also stagnant. You're protected, but you're also trapped. And worst of all, you're convinced this is the intelligent choice. Let's go deeper into the science of this, because when you understand the mechanics, it becomes harder to be deceived by them. There's a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. Your mind isn't fixed. It changes based on what you do repeatedly. Every thought you think, every action you take, is literally rewiring the circuits in your brain. If you spend most of your time avoiding discomfort, you're strengthening the neural pathways of avoidance. You're training your brain to get better and better at finding excuses, at creating rationalizations, at running away. On the other hand, if you force yourself to face discomfort regularly, you're building neural pathways of resilience. You're teaching your brain that discomfort isn't danger, it's growth. This is where the Stoic perspective becomes surgical. Epictetus, who was a slave before becoming a philosopher, taught the dichotomy of control. There's what's under your control and there's what isn't. And wisdom lies in investing all your energy only in what you can control. You don't control whether you'll have natural talent. You don't control whether other people will recognize your work. You don't control whether the market will be favorable. But you absolutely control one thing, whether you'll use your mind as a forge or as a shelter. You control whether you'll face discomfort or run from it. You control whether you'll build systems or just feed hopes, and that's the only thing that matters. Think of your daily routine as an assembly line. What's the raw material entering this line? It's your experiences, your interactions, the content you consume, the conversations you have. And what's the final product coming out? It's your decisions, your behaviors, your results. If you don't like the final product, you have to change the raw material. But most people do the opposite. They complain about the final product while continuing to feed the line with the same contaminated raw material. You want different results? Start feeding your mind with different inputs. Read things that challenge you. Have conversations that make you uncomfortable. Put yourself in situations where you're not the smartest person in the room. That's using your mind as a forge. Let me stop here for a second and ask a question that maybe nobody has ever asked you. What's the biggest fear that prevents you from using your mind as a forge? Not that superficial fear you tell people, but that deep fear you barely admit to yourself. The fear of trying and discovering you're not good enough? The fear that people will see your failures? The fear that all the effort won't be worth it? I want you to know something. This fear is shared by thousands of people watching this video right now. You're not alone in this, and your honesty can make someone else feel less isolated today. If you have the courage, leave a comment telling what that fear is. It can be something simple like, "My biggest fear is trying and failing publicly," or "My biggest fear is discovering I wasted time." Your vulnerability will help someone else take the first step. Now let me continue showing you how to overcome this. The answer isn't in eliminating fear. The answer is in reprogramming your relationship with it. The Stoics had an exercise called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. They deliberately imagined the worst possible scenarios, not to be paralyzed by fear, but to realize they were survivable. Seneca would ask himself, what's the most terrible thing that can happen? And then he would mentally rehearse going through it. The result? When real discomfort arrived, he had already mentally trained to deal with it. It wasn't a surprise. It was just another situation he had already faced in the laboratory of his own mind. You can do the same. Take that project you're avoiding. Now imagine the worst possible outcome. You try and fail completely. People laugh. You lose time and money. Okay, and then what happens? Do you die? No. Do you become homeless? Probably not. Do you lose the ability to try again? Definitely not. In the worst-case scenario, you acquire experience. You learn what doesn't work. You adjust your approach, and you try again. But you know what guarantees your failure? Never trying. Staying in the shelter. Because in the shelter, you never fail, but you also never win. You just exist in a kind of mediocre limbo, where there's no pain, but also no growth. Henry Ford went bankrupt 5 times before creating the Ford Motor Company. 5 times. Imagine how many times he could have decided the shelter was safer. How many times he could have rationalized it wasn't worth it. But he understood something fundamental. The process of failing and adjusting was the very forge that was transforming him into the kind of person capable of building an empire. The failures weren't obstacles to success. They were the path to success. And the difference between him and most people wasn't talent. It was willingness to remain in the forge instead of running to the shelter. Now let's build a practical system you can implement today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but today. Call this the Forge Protocol. First step, identify a specific area of your life where you're using your mind as a shelter. Be honest. It could be your career, where you're avoiding asking for that raise or changing fields. It could be your health, where you're avoiding food discipline or regular exercise. It could be a relationship, where you're avoiding difficult conversations. Choose one, just one. Specificity is power. Second step, define what would be the equivalent of using the forge in that area. What would facing discomfort instead of avoiding it look like? If it's career, it would be sending that email, taking that course, applying for that position. If it's health, it would be training today, preparing healthy meals for the week, sleeping 8 hours a night. If it's relationships, it would be starting the conversation you've been postponing for months. Be specific, write it down. Literally note it on paper or on your phone. Transform the abstract into concrete. Third step, apply Stoic premeditation. Imagine you do this thing and it goes wrong. Write down the worst scenario. Be brutal. Now look at what you wrote and answer, would I survive this? The answer, in 99% of cases, is yes. And if you would survive, then the fear is just a false signal. It's your brain trying to protect you from a danger that doesn't exist. Fourth step, create a motivation-proof system. Ford didn't depend on motivated workers to make the assembly line function. He created a system so efficient, it worked regardless of how people felt. You need to do the same. If you're going to train, set the alarm, lay out your clothes, eliminate morning decisions. If you're going to work on the project, block a specific hour in your calendar, turn off notifications, create an environment without distractions. If you're going to have the difficult conversation, schedule a time, prepare what you'll say, commit publicly. System eliminates the need for willpower. Fifth step, implement the 2-minute rule. When the moment comes to do the difficult thing, commit to doing it for just 2 minutes. Don't think about finishing. Don't think about the outcome. Just start for 2 minutes. What happens most of the time? After 2 minutes, you continue, because the greatest resistance is always at the beginning. It's the initial push that costs energy. Once you're in motion, momentum carries you. This is basic physics applied to psychology. A body at rest tends to remain at rest. A body in motion tends to remain in motion. Take your body out of rest. Sixth step, practice amor fati, love of fate. When discomfort comes, and it will come because you're in the forge now, don't run from it. Embrace it. Tell yourself, this is exactly what I need right now. This difficulty is the hammer shaping me. This pressure is what will make me stronger. The more you resist discomfort, the more it persists. The more you accept it's part of the process, the more quickly it transforms into growth. Resilience isn't about not feeling pain. It's about changing your interpretation of pain. Seventh step, and perhaps the most important, measure your progress by the correct metric. Don't measure by external results, because those you don't fully control. Measure by effort applied, because that you completely control. Did you go to the forge today or stay in the shelter? That's the only metric that matters. Henry Ford measured production efficiency, not worker talent. You should measure consistency of effort, not speed of results. If you went to the forge today, it's a victory. If you faced discomfort today, it's progress. Results are consequence, not cause. Here's a truth that will seem harsh but is liberating. You'll never feel ready. Never. The feeling of being ready is an illusion your brain creates to keep you in the shelter. If you wait to feel confident, you'll wait forever. Confidence doesn't precede action. Confidence is the result of action. You act despite fear, and then confidence emerges as a byproduct. Reverse the order. Stop waiting to feel to do. Start doing to feel. The Stoics had a morning practice called preparation for the day. Before getting out of bed, Marcus Aurelius would remind himself, "Today I will meet ungrateful people, arrogant people, envious people." And then he would decide he wouldn't let these people steal his peace. He was mentally preparing himself for the forge of the day. You can do the same. Every morning, before picking up your phone, before checking messages, before being pulled by external demands, decide, "Today I will use my mind as a forge. Today I will face at least one discomfort. Today I won't run to the shelter." Do this every day for 30 days. You won't recognize the person you'll become. There's a concept from engineering called stress tolerance. Every material has a breaking point, but before that point, stress strengthens the material. Bone subjected to regular impact becomes denser. Muscle subjected to tension becomes stronger. Mind subjected to discomfort becomes more resilient. But there's a detail. The stress has to be progressive. You can't jump straight to maximum level. You start with small discomforts and gradually increase. First week, you face an uncomfortable conversation. Second week, you try something new that scares you a little. Third week, you take a calculated risk. The process is gradual, but the result is exponential. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. You might be thinking, but what if I can't do it? What if I try all this and keep failing? Let me give you the Stoic answer to this. You're already failing. Every day you spend in the shelter, you're failing to become who you could be. You're failing to explore your potential. You're wasting the only life you have living a diminished version of yourself. So the question isn't whether you'll fail trying. The question is whether you'll keep failing by not trying. Between failing in the forge and failing in the shelter, the first at least transforms you. The second just slowly consumes you. Henry Ford said, "If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got." It seems obvious when you read it, but how many people live as if this weren't true? How many people expect different results doing exactly the same things? If your current strategy isn't working, and you know it isn't because otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video, then you need a different strategy. And the different strategy always involves more discomfort, not less. Always involves more risk, not less. Always involves more forge, not more shelter. One last thing about the Ford perspective that can completely change how you see this. He didn't invent the car. He wasn't the first to have the idea. He was the first to create an efficient production system. His genius wasn't in innovation. It was in systematic execution. And that's what you need to understand. You don't need to be special. You don't need to be exceptionally talented. You just need to be systematic. Create a process and follow the process even when you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it. The system works when you're not motivated, when you're tired, when you're scared. The system is what keeps you in the forge, when every fiber of your being wants to run to the shelter. So here's the challenge I want to leave you with. It's not a 30-day challenge. It's not a complete transformation challenge. It's a today challenge. Just today. Choose one thing, just one, that you've been avoiding because it causes you discomfort. It can be small. Actually, it's better if it's small. And today, before going to sleep, you're going to do that thing. Not perfectly, not wonderfully. Just do it. 2 minutes, that's all. And then observe what happens inside you afterward. Observe how you feel different when you lie in bed knowing you didn't run away. Observe how the quality of your sleep changes when you know you went to the forge. Even if just for 2 minutes. And here's what will happen if you do this consistently. It's not magic. It's not esoteric. It's simply neuroplasticity in action. Every time you choose the forge instead of the shelter, you're weakening the avoidance circuit and strengthening the confrontation circuit. Every repetition matters. Every small victory counts. And after a few weeks, something interesting happens. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but your capacity to endure discomfort increases. You become anti-fragile. You become someone for whom pressure isn't a problem, it's fuel. The Stoics had a worldview that seemed pessimistic on the surface, but was deeply liberating at the core. They believed most things that happen are outside our control. Wars, diseases, loss, death. All of this will happen regardless of what you do. But there's one single thing that's totally under your control: how you respond to what happens. You can respond by running, hiding, creating victimization narratives. Or you can respond by facing, learning, strengthening, the forge or the shelter. This choice has always been yours, and always will be. If you made it this far, I already know something important about you. You don't just want to exist, you want to truly live. And that tells me you're exactly the kind of person who belongs in this community. This channel isn't about magical promises or motivational shortcuts. It's about real people using real tools that work in the real world. Every week, I bring a new perspective on how your mind works and, more importantly, how you can work with it in your favor. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm asking, but because you deserve to have regular access to content that challenges you to grow. The next video is ready, and it will show you how to transform your biggest fears into your greatest assets. See you there. Your mind is a forge. It always has been. The question is whether you'll finally stop using it as a shelter and start using it for what it was designed: to transform you into someone who no longer runs from what's difficult, but someone who seeks the difficult because you know that's where true strength is built. Not tomorrow. Today, 2 minutes.